So you know my timer beeps at 5. Is everyone ready? Hi, Victor. Briefs. Because the strict separation of church and state allows for equal access to political power, I affirm and offer the following definitions. Democracy, the belief in freedom and equality between people, or a system of government based on this belief in which power is either held by elected representatives or directly by the people themselves. Best served. This raises questions what best serves democracy normatively. A strict separation, a more lax separation, or no separation at all. It poses a comparison among competing options because best is relative to other alternatives presented. For example, if there's only one person over 8 feet tall in the world, that person is the tallest person. If another person is also over 8 feet tall, there would be a comparison, and that person would be the winner. The historical meaning of the strict separation of church and state has been both confusing and contradictory. Regardless, a stable advocacy must exist prior to any further argumentation, because A, each side must have an opportunity to win, and B, ground inherent to both sides, no matter how narrow, can be representative of the resolutional conflict. Originally derived by courts from the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, separation began as an impediment to the domination of politics by a or many religions. David Felsen has defined strict separation as 1, the government may not aid religion, and 2, the government may not exclude those of a particular belief from receiving the benefits of public welfare legislation. This must be rejected because aid could be active or passive, and we found that the benefits of faith-based initiatives can exist without causing social harms. Other authors such as Hamburger, Eakins, Corbett, and the Everson court case all dictate varying normative ideals of separation, but each maintains the government preference violates strict separation. Still others have defined it as a kind of neutrality, or the prevention of a national religion not having religious justifications for laws, or treating everything as if religion didn't exist. The U.S. Supreme Court has employed or suggested a myriad of tests, including the Lemon test, the coercion test, the endorsement test, and the neutrality test. The results have been redundant. Nothing is completely comprehensive, nothing works well, and nothing is clear. While all interpretations stem from the Establishment Clause, none seem adequate. Even accommodationalism has been considered strict separation. In Everson v. Board of Education in 1947, the court ruled that providing busing to religious schools was constitutional because it was a general welfare program not directly in support of religion. The adoption of even one of these conditional definitions of strict separation of church and state would skew ground in the debate, and more importantly, because it is grounded in the historical nature of the resolution, misrepresent the truth claim that we are trying to prove or disprove. Therefore, I offer as the definition the historically clearest definition of strict separation of church and state, which is upholding the Establishment Clause. Essentially, people should be able to practice their religion, but the government is not able to establish religion. However, there are still disagreements over the Establishment Clause, with the one exception that one religion can't be preferred over another. This uncontroversial aspect of the Establishment Clause will serve as my definition for strict separation. Arlen Adams and Charles Emmerich explain. In light of the historical record, the court correctly observed that the clearest commandment of the Establishment Clause is that one religious denomination cannot be officially preferred over another. Influenced by strict separationist dicta and early opinions, however, the court has gone further by asserting that neutrality prescribes not only government preference among religions, but also every form of non-discriminatory aid to religion in general. This expansive view of neutrality has proven controversial. While scholars appear to agree that the Establishment Clause prohibits preferential treatment for a religion, they sharply disagree over whether it also prescribes non-preferential aid to religion. This provides fair ground, especially for the negative. The definition is predictable because it's historically grounded. It also decreases research burdens because it avoids all the confusing definitions mentioned above. My value is democracy because the resolution demands that both sides best serve it. Democracy requires fluidity and responsiveness to the citizens' needs in order to quickly and accurately reflect the people's will, so my criterion is equal access to political power. Equal access to political power must be the preferred criterion in the round for 3 reasons. First, long-term stability. The virtue of being in a democracy is not enough to constrain the greed of some leaders. As long as leaders seek more power, the citizens must be able to challenge and critique that power and have their voices heard. Therefore, equal access to political power ensures long-term democracy. Second, equal access to political power ensures the most representative democracy because all types of citizens can run for a political office. If only those with a certain worldview were allowed to run, everyone else who did not share that worldview would not be represented. Third, the normative legitimacy of a democracy is contingent upon its inclusion in equal access to policy. Iris Young, professor of law at the University of Chicago Law School, explains. The normative legitimacy of a democratic decision depends on the degree to which those affected by it have been included in the decision-making processes and have had the opportunity to influence the outcomes. Calls for inclusion arise from experiences of exclusion, from basic political rights, from opportunities to participate, from the hegemonic terms of debate. Some of the most powerful and successful social movements of this century have mobilized around demands for oppressed and marginalized groups to be included as full and equal citizens in their polities. Because equal access to political power ensures the best long-term, quality, and normative democracy, it must be the criterion for the round. My sole contention proves that allowing the government to prefer one religion over another creates unequal access to political power. First, negating in essence breeds an incestuous faux democracy akin to theocracy. A lack of strict separation requires that one religion be preferred over another, thus giving the preferred disproportionate political weight. Besides not being able to criticize their policies because they're based on A, divine revelation, and B, infallible mandates, the added weight of being federally endorsed discourages the non-favored from participating because their voices are marginalized. The attempt to participate is at best worthless because the federally endorsed faith can be used as a trump card and at worst violent because the religion can use its coercive force in the government to crush the rebellious. This creates unequal access to political power because atheists can't argue on the same plane as those in power. Additionally, opposing voices fall on deaf ears because politicians are obliged to a higher being and not their constituency. By separating the institutions, affirming doesn't favor one belief system over another. Second, any degree of favoritism towards a or many religions devastates democracy. Even religious requirements for government positions favors the outcome and worldview used by the religion. When one denomination is federally endorsed, implicitly, all other non-believers are not. Because power is relative, increasing the power of one group disenfranchises other groups not conforming to the established norm. Therefore, preferring one faith over another creates a hierarchy of political power where the more one conforms to the established faith, the more self-determination one has, ironically. This must be a prerequisite to other impacts because identity formation mandates conformity in order to access political power. This creates unequal access to political power by adopting the same genocidal mindset as those leading the Spanish Inquisition: convert or be oppressed. Strict separation avoids these harms by never favoring one faith over another, thus promoting equality. Because only a strict separation of church and state can provide for the equal access to political power, I affirm.
Definitional analysis, you mentioned a few different standards for choosing definitions. I hear ground, education, historical accuracy, and research burden. Are those before?
Yeah, and before that, I also say just when evaluating standards, it has to be a definition that allows either side to win the round.
Okay, so just to clarify, ground, history, research, and then what was the fourth one? I already said I mentioned it, but...
Ground, you said research. I'm trying to remember. I don't think you said education.
Okay, education. There we go.
Was that it?
Yeah, I got it.
Because I don't think that's in the one I see.
It's not?
Like the historical nature of the resolution.
Okay, so it's just ground, history, and research then?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, those three. Okay. So you talk about how all these differing conceptions of strict separation are created to try to uphold the Establishment Clause, right?
Yeah.
Or different conceptions of separation, yeah.
Sure.
And what does the Establishment Clause say?
Verbatim, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to peacefully assemble.
Okay, the resolution puts a qualifier in front of separation of church and state, right? That qualifier is the word strict, correct?
Sure.
So why is it acceptable, if you're talking about like historical accuracy, research, and these things, to ignore the wording of the resolution and not consider that word that's modifying separation of church and state?
Well, I think that question is flawed on two levels. The first is that you assume that, or three, there's a difference between strict and just strict separation and separation. The second is I do take that into account. The Eakins definition, which I allude to, and the Hamburger article are both about strict separation. And the third argument is that they'd all be subject to the same flaw. Like the word strict, especially because it hasn't been implemented as much as separation in general, would lead to a vague historical method of implementation, making it even more vague.
Okay. So in the contentions, you have, under the first point of the contention, you discuss of creating theocracies, right? Disproportionate amounts of power, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So is the affirmative advocacy, the negative advocacy can simply be something different than strict separation, than the Establishment Clause, right, as it's outlined, correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Like, you'd have to outline the advocacy,
Okay.
Whether I could tell you whether it was violated the framework or not.
I just need to show an alternative that's better than what you're proposing, right?
Then the Establishment Clause, I'm not sure what you're asking.
Yeah, the Establishment Clause.
You have to prove that something is better than strict separation. It's specifically my conception of strict
And
separation.
to do that, I do not need to reject all aspects of it, right? It just needs to be distinctly different.
You'd have to tell me the argument to evaluate whether it's distinctively different or not.
Okay, that's fine. You talk about how other non-believers will not prefer it. So I'm confused. Is the affirmative advocacy that the negative has to uphold aiding only one religious group or just a host of them?
Just preferencing.
What does preferencing mean?
Meaning you evaluate one better than another a priori.
One?
One or many or religion in general is the rhetoric of the analysis and the framework evidence.
Okay.
Thank you for being so quiet. That was great.
Is everyone all set? I negate. The value is democracy, defined as government by the people. The defining characteristic of democracy is its placement of sovereignty in the hands of the people. With this procedure comes the requirement that the populace is free to formulate its opinions on what government should and should not do. This is why we consider nations where brainwashing takes place thoroughly undemocratic, even if elections were to occur. For the people to be more than just an extension of the state, they must be able to freely formulate their ideas. Thus, the standard is intellectual autonomy, defined as one's ability to determine their beliefs without government coercion. The negative thesis and sole contention is that strict separation entrenches conceptions of what religion is and thus decreases intellectual autonomy. First, the actions government takes have a drastic influence on the way people think and the beliefs they hold. Government power is not only exercised through law and force, but also through the dissemination of ideas. Government is viewed as a source of authority, and its actions can either legitimate or discredit ideas and practices. For example, when government brands an action as legal or illegal, it is establishing in the minds of its constituency a conception of that action as right or wrong. This creates an unavoidable conflict with democracy, since it allows the state to play a role in determining how people act instead of the reverse. The solution is to minimize the state's ability to determine how its populace thinks by not permitting it to define ideologies. Second, affirming inherently involves a definition of religion. The process of defining religion has two implications. First, alternative views of what religion is are disenfranchised, and certain conceptions are privileged. People become inclined to only consider religion as something such as Christianity or Judaism, instead of recognizing that it can take numerous amorphous forms and function in the same manner for different individuals. The impact is that the government denies one's ability to define their own concept of religion and creates societal pressure to view only certain beliefs as truly religious. Democracy is based upon the premise that individuals can define who they are so they can have their own say interjected in government, and not that the government can define them, yet affirming does just that. It allows people to brand others with the help of the government as rational or non-rational, spiritual or non-spiritual, based on what they believe, precluding them from defining their own identity and restricting their intellectual autonomy. Second, by defining religion, discourse on differing ideologies is impeded. The notion of an idea being religious associates certain implications with it, such as its requirement of faith, belief in the supernatural, or its ability to shape one's life. However, many beliefs have the ability to serve many of these same functions. For example, a faith in capitalism or secularism plays the same role as Catholicism does in the lives of many. The impact is that defining religion impedes our ability to properly conceive of how different ideas and concepts shape our world. It arbitrarily creates borders as to what function ideas do and do not perform, when in reality those functions are amorphous and can never really be defined. Individuals are thus less able to properly criticize and understand different ideas and beliefs, preempting meaningful debates and discussions on those issues and limiting their intellectual autonomy. Go over to the affirmative case. Begin at the top with the lengthy definitional analysis. As we talk about in cross-ex, David offers 3 standards for determining definitions: ground, history, and research. However, none of these standards are warranted. Don't let David come back and give new warrants for any of these standards in the AR. He just lists them as things that are important. However, the real standard we're looking to for definitions should be common usage. The reason for that is because debate has the ability to shape the way we view the real world. Once we understand that, we then have to do things in the debate round that are applicable to the real world, meaning then that when we talk about strict separation, we need to talk about the way it's actually being commonly used. More importantly, we also have to look to common usage because the other arguments David offers, especially ground and research, would allow us to redefine words to mean completely whatever we want. The implication of common usage then is that it's really the only argument that actually keeps us tied to the resolution in a meaningful sense, instead of just redefining words to expand the ground. The reason why keeping ourselves tied to the resolution matters is because that's one of the only rules that we actually do have in the activity, i.e. time constraints, and tournaments make you debate a specific topic, meaning then that we should respect that rule and make sure we're actually debating that topic. So, the reason the Felsen definition, which he states is wrong, is actually more commonly used is because that's the only time any government or any institution has actually used the term strict separation when coining phrases. When it did that, that was the Everson decision. David talks about in his own analysis how the government then moved on and prescribed different potential definitions. What he doesn't tell you, though, is that when it did that, it then came up with different terms for those things. For example, after the Felsen definition in the Everson case, the Felsen article explains to you, if you've read it, that the government then changed names of those things, like accommodation, flexible separation, etc. So strict separation is referring to a specific context, so even if it was historically changing over time, that's because it was moving away from strict separation to different things. More importantly, remember that we talked about this in cross-ex. David is totally ignoring the word in front of the resolution. You can't allow the word strict. You can't allow him to simply take ground from the Establishment Clause because of the fact that he's disrespecting then the wording of the resolution. The word strict is there for a specific purpose. Even if you're not agreeing with his interpretation of strict separation, you realize that it can't just be the Establishment Clause because the resolution clearly puts that word there for a purpose, meaning it's not solely the Establishment Clause. At worst, that means you at least allow my advocacy to be that the government can establish lots of different religions, not only aiding one. At worst, that's the difference. So, remember then, though, so that's why you're looking to my definition. This then makes David's case irrelevant because he's only gaining offense from the Felsen from the definition espoused as the Establishment Clause. So that's not going to matter in terms of the round. However, even if you don't believe that, my advocacy can effectively function by taking David's offense, yet creating the simple difference that we're going to treat religious institutions the same as non-religious institutions. My advocacy can still function in the sense that I would not allow the government to preference a single religion. I just then would not allow it to be preferencing non-governmental organizations as well. This violates the tenets of strict separation because Because one, David talks about history is important. Well, strict separation of church and state is always used to treat religious institutions differently. That means his advocacy has to be treating them differently. I'm violating the concept of treating them differently. And second, the term strict separation of church and state logically necessitates that there's a difference. Otherwise, it would say separation of government and NGOs. So my advocacy can then take the benefits that David's discussing. My implication is simply that we wouldn't establish non-governmental organizations as like faiths either. Then, you go to the actual contention. First off, on the standard, he talks about having equal access to power. But the problem with this is that the standard is preclusionary. Because all the things that he talks about, how people can run for office, have long-term challenging, and need to be included within the process, are all taken out if the government is able to extend its power into what individuals are thinking. If the government is controlling what individuals are thinking and affecting the way and the decisions that they're going to be making, then the government is simply creating its own long-term stability by reinforcing its own ideologies. More importantly, it's only going to potentially allow individuals to run for office, which are then fitting in within its own ideologies because it's defining how individuals think. So my standard is totally preclusionary. That means if David's winning the AC and I'm winning the NC, you're still going to negate. You can go to the contention. First off, and the first point he talks about how he creates disproportionate amounts of power. The problem is that you can actually turn it against him. If government's establishing lots of different faiths, it's actually going to create more equalities within society. Certain religious institutions are larger than others. However, if the government's aiding more of them, it's actually going to help the disenfranchised because money always has diminishing returns. $1 is worth more to a homeless person than it is to a millionaire. That means that if the government is always giving aid to lots of religious institutions, it's going to solve inequalities by helping those religious institutions which are potentially victims of majority conceptions of what religion is. For example, you could help organizations which are potentially victimized by the domination of Christianity in the United States. Second, you remember that David is also creating disproportionate amounts of power because he gives the government the ability to redefine religion to mean whatever it wants, meaning that it can skew the political process in any direction, so it can only aid those organizations which are going to be questioning it, and he can exclude those organizations outside of religion that it doesn't want being defined in that manner. And then the next point he talks about how non-believers are going to be preferred, but the problem is that you turn it against them as well because of the fact that by establishing strict separation and not allowing the government to preference religion, but preferencing secular organizations, David is establishing a pressure on religious individuals to become secular because the government is treating them differently. This is comparatively worse because you're harming all individuals who are religious, while potentially David is only establishing a single religion, while he's establishing an entire concept, alienating whole groups of individuals. Therefore, it's comparatively worse to be harming all religious individuals than just establishing one faith.
Clarify as simply as you can, and your argument about the NGOs, basically it's your alternative above on the framework analysis. It's the last argument you make on framework.
Right. You say the government cannot establish a faith with the establishment clause analysis. Prefer a faith. So I would say, okay, then my analysis would be that I can take the benefits of the AC and just say that the government then would not be preferring NGOs.
Wait, sorry. What do NGOs have anything to do with it?
Because I explained that strict separation necessitates treating religious institutions differently than non-religious institutions, right?
So it's contingent on you winning that definition?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, strict separation means treating them equally.
No, that strict separation means any concept of separation of church and state deals with treating religious institutions differently than non-religious institutions. That's what that's based on.
Okay. If you don't prefer anyone, if you just say everyone's equal, why do I have to define a religion? What a religion is?
Because when the government's saying that it can't prefer religion but can prefer, for example, other types of organizations, it's going to need to establish if that organization is in fact religious.
Okay. Empirically, governments have defined religions in the past. We've defined people as cults. Where have any of the harms that you talk about in your negative case happened in the real world?
I think they definitely occur. I think if you look to the most contemporary example in the United States, you can see that frequently we alienate things that are considered cults and consider them bad, outside norms. Those people are crazy, while people who believe in Christianity or Judaism are very normal because that's what religion really is.
That's an empirical claim. Is there empirical warrant supporting any of your analysis?
If anyone doesn't believe that that's true, they can... That's what I'm explaining to you. More importantly, I don't see why I would need that empirical warrant there. One, two, you would still need to assert that that's not the case, and I think it's clear that there are preferences when we conceive of what religion is in the United States. Common usage is how that term is actually used in the real world, so I explain the only time...
Wouldn't you have to have some sort of survey of the real world in
order
to establish how people use it?
No, because I'm saying the only time it was used in the context of a government doing that is the Felsen ruling, and the Everson ruling, which you yourself cite.
Okay. My analysis under there says that it's an inadequate definition because we don't really know what aid means, whether it's passive or active. Was there a response to that in the last...
Even if I would say that doesn't matter because that would link into the reasons that you're not giving standards for things like ground history or research.
There was not an argument against it in the last speech.
I think it's grouped with my definitional analysis.
Okay, so let's go through. Let's pretend for a second I accept your argument of common usage.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The whole purpose of my framework analysis is to basically justify affirmative conditionality. Is there any argument on the affirmative case saying why I'm conditional?
No, my implication of the definition is that if you lose it, you can't be garnering offense off the AC because you're just talking about upholding the establishment clause, which is not strict separation. I said that in the I'm almost 100% positive that I said that under the common usage, like in the common usage stuff, when I'm talking about my standards and when I explain what common usage is.
Common usage analysis is that it has real-world implications, and then the government has used it empirically, and that's the only
Like, that rhetoric was there, David. I'm sorry if you misfloated, but I said that if David's not doing that, you can't vote for him. Not that you can't vote for him, but you can't get offense off the AC. That's the implication. You can't get offense off the AC.
Is that what you got?
242.
That's okay, I got you with 127.
What did I say?
123.
That's okay.
Here's the order. It's going to be framework analysis on the 1AC for a while, and then with his NGO stuff as the last argument within the framework analysis. Then his quick definition of democracy, then criterion debate, then affirmative negative.
Where are you starting?
Just top of framework. He says none of my standards are warranted, but except the two warranted ones at the top, saying they're prerequisites to evaluating any kind of standard is that A, I must have a chance to win, and B, I can use narrow interpretations of the resolution, even though this is justified because it's representative of the entire conflict. These two arguments are conceded. This means that a prerequisite to evaluating standards is that I have to be able to win the round. It's impossible to know, and it's always going to be conditional because strict separation of church and state has had changing meanings even within the Felsen evidence. It says that because there are different interpretations of the word aid, which is conceded in the NC, then I never know what I'm actually affirming. This means you must reject his definition on face because he's losing the prerequisite to the standards debate. His next argument is that we should look to common usage, and that debate is about education. However, it's also about strategy. That's why both of us are making strategic arguments, and he's making like a little permutation-type argument on his NGO analysis. But second, I'd argue that you can turn it against him with the B cross application of the B subpoint, which he concedes. It says that by using the narrow ground in the resolution, you create what is the most inherent part of the resolution, because this is the sole part of strict separation of church and state since its introduction in 1803 by Jefferson that hasn't changed, or from 1947 court case that you don't prefer. Therefore, I get the best amount of common usage because it's the only one who hasn't changed throughout the years. Then his next argument is that the government is that is not changing names within the Felsen article. First, he doesn't present the article, so there's no reason to believe this. But second, it says if you're going to adopt the common usage standard, that Corbett and Hamburger, which both post-date Felsen, argue that there's still contradictions between the two. Therefore, it's not resolved. This means that I can never meet my burden that I set up for myself at the very top of the case, saying on the definitions debate, saying that I always have to be able to win at least one part of the round. Then go to his next argument that I'm ignoring the word strict separation. However, first, he never delineates between what's difference between strict and regular separation. But secondly, to argue that the Hamburger and Eakins definition establishes that they actually use the rhetoric of strict separation in their definitions and they're still conflicting. Then extend the Adams and Emmerich evidence, which is conceded, that says the one area which there is no conflict about the establishment clause is that you can't preclude the favoritism of religion. It says specifically that only when strict separationist dicta was introduced to it, then scholars started disagreeing about what it means. Therefore, it again violates my burden at the top, saying that he can't make arguments that don't make me able to win the round because I never know what I'm defending. Then group his NGO stuff in that together. There are four responses. First, he never offers any contextual definition for his counter-advocacy, meaning that I can't attack it on a contextual level. This is abusive and a reason to reject the argument because I never actually know what I'm responding against. Second, I'll argue because he doesn't specify which NGOs. I can't argue particular arguments against them. This kills affirmative strategy for the round because I'm never able to articulate which arguments, what's beneficial for which particular NGOs. But third, I would argue that I can treat NGOs as I would a religion or anyone else as a secular ideology because my criterion sets up that we treat everyone equally, and that's the definition of non-preferencing. Then I don't have to draw any delineations between NGOs and anyone else. The fourth argument is he concedes in cross-examination that it's contingent on him winning the definition, which currently he is not. Then go to the criterion debate. The criterion of the bar should be a mix of each other because his criterion of intellectual autonomy is worthless at the point where they can't access political power. Otherwise, they just have ideas and they have no mechanism by which to exercise them. Then go to the negative case. Extend the second argument in the affirmative case. It cross-applies against the affirmative case. It says if you're given any incentive whatsoever in which to garner power because you have to conform, that means you're never going to have any unique ideas because the only way to have self-determination, ironically, is to conform to the established norm to make sure you're not going to be oppressed. His next argument is that I'm forced definitionally to provide a definition of religion. However, I tell you I don't never have to define a religion because if I'm not preferring anyone, then I need not establish what a religion actually is. The implication is that I don't bite the harms of the NC because I'm never defining religion because I can just say treat everyone equally regardless of their religion. Affirmative case. He makes three arguments against the first contention. The first is the turn saying that if I'm aiding some people more than other, then I'm not preferencing. However, preferencing is an active act, meaning is an active, not a passive action, meaning that I'm never actually doing it intentionally. But secondly, you can turn it against him because the only way to make sure that you prevent less alternative oppression is by making sure that they aren't being subject to such things like genocide, which is mentioned in the second point. His next argument is that the government has to define religion. That's his negative case. His third argument is that I'm preferring secular organizations. However, turn it against him. I'm preventing the domination of secular organizations by saying that you don't prefer secularism over religion or vice versa.
I have myself with 123 left, so we're going to start. We're going to be starting on the uniqueness analysis on the AC. Okay. Are you confused by that?
Yes.
Okay. The analysis discussing why I can claim the benefits of the AC. Okay. And then from there, we're going to be going down the AC, then over to the MC.
Sorry, you're talking about this last argument you made on the framework, right?
Yeah.
NGOs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone all set? First off, David says that I'm not providing a context. I'm clearly providing a context. I say very clearly that the negative thesis is that the government is simply treat non-governmental organizations the same as other religious organizations. That's a very clear context. Second, David says he can't figure out what NGOs are going to be. But the problem is that I think, one, David doesn't articulate why that even matters in terms of the round. Right? He talks about... Okay, I think David actually did articulate why that mattered. But the problem with this is that one, David had an opportunity to do this in cross-examination. He could have asked me what I meant by non-governmental organizations. Two, I think it's pretty clear what a non-governmental organization is. It's any it's like a company, business, anything along those lines, institutions that are created to be serving purposes. It's a common sense definition. What matters with that is that common sense is a standard accepted for definitional argumentation. We don't have to define every single word we ever use. Meaning then that at a point where David wasn't utilizing his ability to ask what it was, or really explaining why there's any sort of specific context that he doesn't understand, that means you shouldn't be looking to that analysis. Then he says he can treat NGOs the same. He misses the two warrants I give you as to why he can't. One, he tells you history himself matters, so I agree. I say, yes, history does matter. That means it's always been used to treat religious institutions differently. He drops that. Second, he says the logic of the term necessitates that because it says separation of government, of church and state, not state and non-governmental organizations. This then becomes your first easy negative way out of the round because of the fact that I'm able to gain the benefits. That's clearly how it's labeled in the NC, that I gain AC benefits. The difference is simply that I'm going to establish the same thing with other non-governmental organizations. I don't allow that same preferencing. So if you understand what I meant with NGOs, you can clearly vote. That's your easy way out of the round. That doesn't have anything to do with the definition. It's super clear. More importantly, don't let David extend anything about how it was unfair by not defining NGOs because he never tells you why any of that analysis comes before the standard, so you should still be voting on the standard, so I'm winning David's standard with that analysis. Then, you can go to the standard itself. David says that it's worthless without, my standard is worthless without his. Granted that each of our standards necessitate the other to fully achieve democracy, but he drops my analysis, which is that mine is chronologically first. That before we start looking to things like individuals exercising this power, first we have to make sure that they're able to formulate their own opinions. So mine, at least chronologically, is the first thing. That's the first step. They both need each other, but mine's the one you need to be looking to first, so that's the standard in the round. With that, then, I want you to go over to the negative advocacy. David's first response is that no, individuals have to conform to certain ideas to get access to power. But the problem is that this is the scenario that's being stopped in the NC. He says that we have to conform to certain ideas to be able to exercise our power. My position is that we can stop that and make individuals conform to less ideas, i.e. certain conceptions about religion, to have their voices heard. So I'm solving the problem that David's discussing here by making sure that I decrease the government's ability to be defining different people's ideologies. You shouldn't have to change the way you think to participate in the government because that decreases your intellectual autonomy. His next response is that he's not defining it so he doesn't have to prefer it, but remember, he drops the two warrants as to why he is being unique, meaning then that he is defining religion. So, this is your second easy negative way out of the round. Remember that I told you that even if you buy the AC and you buy the NC, I gave you weighing analysis in the NC that David never responds to against the standard, where I told you that mine's going to be comparatively worse. So at the extent where I'm winning the NC, what happens on the AC becomes irrelevant in the round because I'm getting a comparative advantage here by not allowing the government to take control of what individuals are thinking based upon disenfranchising alternative conceptions of religion and second, impeding people's discourse. But if you don't like that and you want to look to the ASK standard, I want you to go to the terms that I put against David's contention. The first term talked about the diminishing value of money. David said that preference has to do with active support. Great, I'm talking about giving money. That seems fairly active. Second, he says that no, he's going to make sure that these bad things don't happen, i.e. preventing genocide. I have no idea what he's talking about with preventing genocide. This seems completely non-responsive. If you buy, I'm violating strict separation by giving money to those faiths. That then means that I'm actually creating I'm creating more equality within society and fulfilling David's standard of equal access to power. He doesn't refute the fact that money always has diminishing returns, meaning then that if the government establishes this idea of giving money to lots of different religious groups, it's going to help those that don't have money. I'm therefore creating better equality within society. This is going to outweigh any analysis David tries to bring off the second point because this affects lots of individuals within society because it affects all those who are disenfranchised. While the second point, talking about preferencing of faith and hurting those who don't believe in it, is only going to refer to individuals who don't believe in that specific faith. But even if you want to look there, I think I'm still winning that analysis. David says that no, he's preventing secular institutions from dominating religious ones, but the problem is that he's just asserting analysis that I was clearly preempting when I told you that no, secularism is its own thing. It's the absence of religion. David's preferring the absence of religion to the presence of religion. So at best, David's not getting any offense off the AC because it's totally washing out. Granted, he's not preferring a specific faith, but he's preferring the idea of you not being religious over you being religious. So he's then decreasing individuals' access to power. So these are two easy ways you're going to be able to negate even off David's standard. So when you sit back to evaluate the round, all the stuff at the top about common usage becomes fairly insignificant. All that matters is the uniqueness analysis, and the other piece of analysis I told you going up to the definition was that word strict means David can't just talk about the establishment clause. David's response is that what is the difference going to be? I outlined that at best I told you the difference, i.e. that I can aid lots of religions, not just establishing one. So that's the framework that I'm setting up. I can aid lots of different religious organizations. He talks about how the Adams analysis or something uses the rhetoric of strict separation, but he doesn't tell you why that matters or makes any link with that. So when you're evaluating the round, the first thing you should be looking at is the uniqueness analysis, which explains to you that if you have an idea what NGOs are, that's clearly your super easy way out of the round. That impacts to both standards because I'm clearly then winning the benefits of the AC by making sure the government isn't establishing religion. Moreover, it's not even establishing concepts of religion. The difference then is I'm just also not establishing other non-governmental organizations' beliefs as part of the state. So therefore, even if you buy everything on the AC, you're still negating off that. If you don't like that analysis, you can vote off the turn. The first turn is just really badly mishandled, talking about the diminishing value of money, which means then that I'm actually solving the problem of inequalities and solving the problem that David outlines. This then means that I'd be winning the ask standard because at best the second point is going to wash out. Maybe David's not preferring a specific religious institution, but he's preferring the idea of you not being religious. So you can vote there. You can vote off the NC analysis because remember, David does have to conform. David does have to define religion, and remember that I'm solving the problem of people having to conform to get their say. They have to conform less. That solves intellectual autonomy. So when David gets up his next speech, just remember that I'm getting those benefits. You can vote very easily on the turn. At best, they're going to wash out. If you can't vote on David's standard, you should default to mine because of my turns. I'm winning that standard.
The 2AR is going to be outline it very clearly where I'm going to go real quick. Off of his response about common usage, I'm going for this, starting on the second argument against that from the 1AR, and then I'm going to his first voting issue about the NGO stuff.
Sorry, where's the first one?
He makes the argument.
The 1AR or the second argument out of the 1AC?
The second argument out of the 1AR, off of his argument of common usage. Then we're going to his first voting issue, then standards quickly, and then affirmative negative. And I'll be signposting. He concedes the turn, saying that the best is, if we're using common usage, that when we should only be looking to things that are inherent to strict separation, and that just means no preferencing. Then drop down to the fourth argument I give against these NGOs. I don't know why he concedes it, but in cross-examination, he concedes that him winning the NGOs argument is contingent on him winning the definitions analysis. I asked him twice in cross-examination. He made the same concession both times. He concedes that argument, so now his first voting issue is taken out. But even if you don't buy that, go to the first argument saying that he didn't give a clear textual advocacy to his alternative. Thus, I never know exactly what he's advocating, so you ought to reject it. His argument is I give a clear context. He misunderstood the word contextual with textual advocacy. He just straight up misunderstood the word. This rejects his first voting issue and means there's no offense because it's unpredictable what it's going to become, and can't attack it on a textual level, which I gave him the burden to provide for. Now, his only argument against the framework evidence is that there's a big difference between separation and strict separation, but you can extend the Hamburger and Eakins analysis I told you in the last speech, saying that there are authors today in the status quo that still don't agree on what it means, therefore there's no consensus, so we only looked at the thing that's inherent about strict separation, and that's that you don't prefer one religion over another. So now let's look to his offense that he has left. On the Criterion debate, his argument is that his is chronologically first. We'll use his standard. Against my first argument, his argument is that he's going to aid that he gets more aid and solves the problems problematized in the 1AC because you can give things like aid. I made a second argument that was a little bit blippy, but had an argument, but via his own theory analysis, saying that you can clarify arguments in cross-examination by asking them what they mean. Then I could have clarified that my argument that was when you give money to people, you justify the genocide that I'm talking about, because then you can give money to the people that you like and don't give money to the people you don't like. This has been consistent with the advocacy from the 1AR because it's all about preferencing, saying that when you can decide who gets more money, then you're giving preferencing and valuing the lives of those people above other people, thus justifying genocide. So that takes out his offense against the affirmative case. Then he says I'm preferring secularism over to religious, but I linked turn this in last speech saying that I'm not preferring anything. I'm in fact the epitome of not preferring anything because definitionally strict separation means not preferring anything. So the arguments that I've conceded is the second point coming out of the affirmative case. It says that now you create an incentive as soon as you prefer one faith over another to decide who gets more political power. You create an incentive by which to conform to the established norm. I told you in the 1AC, in the 1AR, that this operates under his criterion because it says it operates off of the level of identity formation is the rhetoric of the 1AC and 1AR. This means at the point when people are given an incentive to conform, this outweighs his case on 3 levels. The first is on the strength of the link. It's been there since the beginning of the round and it's uncontested, whereas there's ink against his objectively mine's stronger. Second, I would argue it happens on a magnitude level because it says it's not just the religious people that are hurt now, but everyone in society because everyone has to conform in order to garner any kind of political support. The third argument is on a probability level because people are given an incentive to conform. That's the only way they can maintain political power. That's the only way they're going to do it. So now compare this to his argument that I have to define religion, and I'm very clearly outweighing him. The round's very simple. I've taken out any offense whatsoever he had against the 1AC, then I've link turned everything else, and now I'm straight up outweighing him back to his standard.